How is everybody doing today? So, I am re recording episode 159, which, no, excuse me, episode 160, which it has turned out that there were challenges with that video's audio. My sincere apologies with regards to that. But I'm just wanted to re-record it briefly, a shorter version of that video, just so that I can cover the main points that I was covering in that video, which might have been very difficult for the viewer to hear because the audio was very low and very bad. So what I was covering in that video of episode 160 was an issue of fiscal policies or tax policy. And the main thrust of that video was that South Africa needs to cut taxes across the board. Cut taxes across the board, whether it's for individuals, organizations, corporates, just cut taxes across the board. And one of the main reasons of why taxes have to be cut across the board is that economic theory does tell us that cutting taxes is an economic growth strategy. It is expansionary in nature and it creates jobs. Obviously, there are issues around the issue of cutting taxes, like concerns around inflation, but I wouldn't worry about that because the South African Reserve Bank, one of its primary responsibility is to watch inflation and keep it within the set targets. So the first tax rate that I would cut would be the value added tax, which in the United States is known as the sales tax. And the current going rate is 15%. I would reduce that all the way down to 5%. The challenge with the VAT or value added tax is that it affects everything and it makes everything expensive. And subsequently, what it does is that it has a negative impact on consumption and the economy, and eventually it affects economic activity and economic growth. And so I would cut it all the way down to 5%. And obviously there might be some concerns in the future, say, okay, maybe we might have to raise it up a bit in the future, maybe from 5 to 8%, but we will have to say just play that by ear to see what would happen, especially with regards to the issues of inflation. But the rate of 15% is unconscionable and it is unjustifiable. So I would cut it all the way down to 5%. And that would subsequently mean that every single South African would be able to get more value for their rand. Because basically it means right now for every rand that you are spending on most goods, you are only able to you only have 85% of the rand that you are spending available to you. And that rand has already been taxed. That is unacceptable. And so when you're cutting it down to 5%, you are saying that for every rand spent, what you have available is 95 cents, which is much better. And then I would go to individual tax rates, which the highest rate being 45% for the highest earning individuals who earn 1 million rand a year and higher, 45%. I will cut that all the way down to say 28%. 28%. Which basically means that for an individual who is earning 1 million rand a year, he would be receiving roughly 15,000 rand per month raise. That is like the raise that he would be getting or she would be getting per month if the tax rate is reduced from 45% to 28%. The person would get a pay raise of approximately 15,000 rand, 16,000 rand. And if it is a couple, so a household, which earns R1 million each, which makes it R2 million for the household. That would mean that household will collectively be getting a pay raise of 30,000 Rand per month, which is significant. Yeah, and so which would mean that starting there at 45%, going down to the other tax bands, reducing them also at a similar rate, meaning that everyone who is working in South Africa and is paying individual tax, income tax, would get a pay raise, which would, as economic theory suggests and evidence suggests, will result in higher output, higher consumption in the economy, more jobs will be employed. And then we move to the corporates, who the corporate income tax rate right now it is at around 28%. I would reduce that all the way down to 15%, 16%. And then I would go to the issues like capital gains tax, which is around 21% for for corporates, around 28% for individuals. I would also reduce that all the way down to 15% or even 10%. Capital gains tax in particular is one of the taxes that don't make any sense at all to me. It is inhibitive. It inhibits economic activity, it inhibits commerce, and it stifles the economy, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So I would reduce that all the way down to 10% for both individuals and corporates. And then there are other taxes here, specialist kind of taxes that affect certain products like tobacco and alcohol. I'll look at those ones that are particularly called sin taxes. I would look at those as well, and I would reduce them by approximately 20% to 40%, because all of those taxes, they also inhibit economic activity. The only tax that I wouldn't reduce would be the sugar tax, because we know that the number one causes of death in South Africa is lifestyle diseases, diabetes, hypertension, strokes, which are correlated to sugar. So I'll probably leave that as it is. And all of those, like in tax cuts across the board, would result in more than 100,000 jobs being created in a period of, say, 12 to 18 months after they become effective. And so when you add that with the jobs that would be created by the other actions that are suggested in the prior videos, that would result in economic growth of around 4.5% to 5%. So that is something that I would do urgently. And then there are issues of whether would there be a problem with the deficit if we do that? Would the deficit go up if we cut taxes? The answer is not necessarily so. The reason being, firstly, that when you cut income taxes and then that gets compensated by more people getting employed, you have a lower tax rate, but you have more people paying taxes. And if you have enough people paying taxes, what has to happen? You actually can end up receiving more tax revenue than you were receiving before, which was seen in the United States in the year of 2018, a year after the Trump tax cuts were made into law. What will be very important is that government spending would have to be watched carefully and will have to be reduced. Some of these governments will have to be cut. Some of the bloated government will have to be reduced. All of the waste, fraud, and inefficiencies will have to be cut all the way down. And eventually all of these social welfares which we are paying through debt would have to have some sort of sunset clause. It is not sustainable to keep on having all of these unsustainable social welfare programs. I wouldn't cut them out immediately, but I will give a time frame of saying maybe within 20 years, 30 years, most of them at least need to end. And then you cut the government down, including provincial governments. They are too big, they are too bloated. Deputy ministers need to go, they have no purpose at all. All of these boards that have no purpose need to go. All of these institutions that that are just there for paying salaries, all of them also would need to go. That is what that episode 160 was all about, folks. And again, I apologize for the audio problems that we had in that video, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers.